So I take these, they are for my eyeballs. It's a supplement, it's vitamin A, vitamin C, vitamin E, zinc, and copper. And I take them, you're supposed to take them twice a day too. It's like quite a bit. I'm taking this dose. Taking this dose now, but I had this earlier. This is an antihistamine, and it has an active ingredient of diphenhydramine. And so that's because it's super windy in Vegas. It's spring, all the pollen's everywhere, so all my stuff is going crazy. I have no idea if these two conflict with each other. This and all of this stuff is over the counter. You just buy it and then take as much as you want. They say that you should be careful with taking them with other drugs. You shouldn't take them with other drugs. If you're on a prescription, you shouldn't take them. But I can never remember sitting down and like making sure. I just kind of go, oh, I've got a sore. I'm gonna put Neosporin on it. I've got a headache, ibuprofen. I've got a cold or a cough. I'm gonna do some NyQuil or Dayquil or some Quil. And what we're gonna talk about today is how these drugs, which are convenient and are helpful and are useful, may be more complicated than we think. Specifically, we're gonna be talking about Ozempic and Ozempic babies. And if you haven't heard that term before, we'll help you figure it out. Today, on Weekly Dad News. So a couple of drugs that have been on the market for a while are kind of all over the news now because they have a side effect of weight loss. But that's a side effect. The Ozempic formulation was originally for treating type 2 diabetes. It helps with your satiety, like how full you feel, by messing with some chemicals in the brain, specifically what are called GLP-1 receptors. And so this drug, you take it and you feel full even when you aren't. And so that decreases the amount of food you take in, it changes the way your insulin cycle works, and it can help people that have that issue. It is not a weight loss drug, but that off-label use is showing promising signs of weight loss. And so now they also have Wegovy, which is a similar formulation, but it's specifically designed and marketed and tested as a weight loss drug and not as a diabetic aid. As people take these more and more, you're seeing them take them for obvious reasons. There are people that just want to be skinnier. We are a very fat country as Americans. We're very large, and there's a lot in the public consciousness about body image and body shaming. And a 15% reduction is quite a bit. This is a 15% difference on my body. And that's not Ozempic, that was like 4 months of diet and exercise, cardio, and working at it, and then, you know, I'm kind of back up there again. So you slide off of it and it kind of goes back and forth. With Ozempic, you do have, and Wegovy, you do have that issue, is that when you go off the drug, you're likely to gain the weight back. It has a lot to do with lifestyle choices as much as it does what your chemical composition is. Now, I think the fact that Ozempic is being used off-label, which means it's not for what it's created for, to get people this 15% weight loss, it's actually really common in medicine, right? So there's a drug called sildenafil, and it's supposed to help with heart issues and blood pressure issues, right? So one of the side effects, though, is you end up with an erection that lasts 4 hours if you're a dude. So they relabeled it Viagra, and they sell it to do other things, right? So that off-label prescription is chasing the side effect. Normally that side effect list is all kinds of things you don't want to happen. It's possibility of cancer. It is nausea, vomiting, diarrhea. You see them on the commercials. When they scroll through all that stuff or say it on the radio really fast, some of them's kind of disturbing. They sound worse than the cure. For this minor relief, you're gonna have these crazy side effects. But the side effect for sildenafil, Viagra, was something people wanted, and so they started using it to treat erectile dysfunction. With this one, with Ozempic, the side effect is something people want. People wanted it so bad that the people that need it for their diabetes meds couldn't get it because it was being used and prescribed for the off-label use, which is where you get Wegovy, you get competitors, and there's this chasing of the market. As this happens, there is a complication there. And that complication is what's happening with pregnancies and the rise of pregnancies on Ozempic and what are called Ozempic babies. Before we get into Ozempic babies, we're going to talk about something that's kind of disturbing. It happened back in the 50s and 60s. There are still people alive with it today, but it's called thalidomide. And so thalidomide was developed by a German company post-World War II, so keep that in mind, called Chemie Grünenthal. And Grünenthal now has a lot of educational stuff on their website about the thalidomide disaster, what happened, what they did, and there's funds and resources available now for survivors of this. But here's what happened. Thalidomide was sold over the counter as a drug called Contergan from 1957 to 1961. It was a sleep aid and a sedative. At that point in time, when they did lab studies on drugs, they go, cool, what can it do? What are we trying to make it do? And will it kill people if they take too much? What's the lethal dose of Contergan, thalidomide? And in this case, on animal testing, they're like, it doesn't seem to have a lethal dose. So sell it over the counter. Let people have it. Remember too, that this is not too far off from like the 20s and stuff when there was cocaine in Coca-Cola and you could buy opium over the counter as a drop to make you feel better and help women's anxiety. So this isn't crazy. This is the development of the systems to take care of this. And thalidomide is one of the big reasons we have those systems. It worked as a sleep aid and a sedative. A side effect, an off-label use, like if I'm taking these antihistamines, but I'm taking them to cure a headache, I'm in the wrong direction. In this case, one of the side effects of thalidomide was that it eased nausea and morning sickness in pregnant women. So they started using it for that. Doctors would recommend, go get some Contergan, thalidomide, down at the pharmacists and take that to ease your morning sickness. This is in Germany and the UK and eventually in 49 countries. One thing I will say is at the FDA in the United States, we said no. We said, show us your clinical studies and the results. And they kept going, look, here's our testing on animals, here's what we've seen. And they're like, no, show us your tests on humans. Show us clinical results that show it does what you say it does and doesn't have side effects. So thalidomide, Contergan, is not available in the United States during this period. They do a limited test. In USA, it was distributed to 1,200 physicians, and an estimated 20,000 patients took it. Of those, only 600 were pregnant during the course of the trial. So this is one where the USA really gets it right. And one of the reasons that other countries do what we did is because of how right we get it on this. Okay. What thalidomide did for pregnant women is ghastly. I am not going to show you any photographs. I am only going to describe it because it is disturbing. I warn you that now. You may not want to sit through this if you're pregnant or if you're expecting to be pregnant or have had a rough pregnancy. It's a trigger warning. I don't want to disturb anybody, but here's what happens with thalidomide. If you're pregnant and take thalidomide, it is possible that your baby's development can be changed and can be distorted. And of the babies that were affected by thalidomide, a lot of them miscarried. They didn't go to term. They were stillborn. Those that did go to term had limb development dysfunctions. In large part, their limbs didn't grow full length, and they didn't grow all of their fingers or toes. Their bodies were sometimes cleft developmentally, which means they didn't quite have all of the fusing all the way down the spine, or not down the spine, but down through the rest of the body. And it's all kind of disturbing because you have kids that have shortened arms, 2, maybe 3 fingers on each hand, and 2, maybe 3 toes on each foot that are elongated. It's very disturbing to look at the images. It's very disturbing to look at what happened to these poor kids. But those kids that are born go on and have lives. When Germany starts looking around and the UK start looking around and going, what's going on? Why are these kids being born this way? Eventually, they put it together. But at that point, thalidomide had been on the market for 5 years. So in those 5 years, it is estimated that over 10,000 babies were affected by the drug. And out of those 10,000, half of them didn't really make it to term, and if they did, they were stillborn. And the other half were born with deformities that made disability assistance necessary in a lot of ways for the rest of their lives. There were several court cases in this trying to place blame on Kimi Grunenthal, the company that developed and marketed the drug. And in the end, they ended up settling out of court with the families. There is a support fund both in the UK and in Germany for those living with thalidomide birth defects. Okay, why am I talking about thalidomide? Because in response to thalidomide, we do a lot of things in our medical systems here and internationally to change them. And one of those things that we do is we go, okay, when we're doing drug testing, let's never test on pregnant women. Let's make that a preliminary exclusion from the testing. First, you'll test on animals, then you'll test on humans, then you can test on pregnant animals, then you can talk to pregnant people about prescribing it to them, but they have to be fully aware. Because of that, we have less information about how pregnant women react to almost any drug. Not only that, but we have a harder time figuring out how drugs affect women differently than men. And they do. There are chemical differences in the way that women and men react to things based around the menstrual cycle and because of the lifetime of the egg as opposed to the sperm. Guys make sperm all the time. It's brand new. Meh. Women are born with their set of eggs. So if there's a drug that has any effect on those cells at any point in life, it's affected those cells and they are permanently changed. And that's where this gets complicated, because without that data, we can't really chase down that idea. And here's an idea of how widespread that is. And one place they research all this stuff is the National Institute of Health. We talked before about the National Institute of Mental Health, NIM. This is the National Institute of Health, NI. Ni, like the knights who say ni, I guess. But the National Institute of Health, they took a survey over 400 different substances. So these are all drugs that have been studied clinically and are proven and are in use. And out of those 400 drugs, there's only 20% that we know have a different effect depending on your sex. So it affects boys and girls differently. Beyond that, there's 20% that have no sexual split in the data. They didn't test for it, so they don't know. There are, the rest of them, there's no clinically relevant data. Either they have it and it's unaffected, or they don't have it, but because of the way it operates, it shouldn't affect, okay? So, but 1 in 5, that's huge. If one of the, well, it'd be 1.5 of these drugs acted differently on Kirsten than on me, Kirsten's my girlfriend. If one of these acted differently on her than me, that'd be something that we should know. There should be something on the bottle that says differently. Now, a lot of drugs will say on the outside, do not take if pregnant, and in large part that's because we don't know. We haven't studied the effect on pregnant women. And now we get to the Ozempic babies, and this is the weird bit. So recently, over the course of the last year, when the increase of taking Ozempic has just shot through the roof. It's been hard to find for the people that have diabetes. But as it shot through the roof, there are more people reporting, hey, I'm pregnant. I didn't expect to be. I was on birth control. I have had issues getting pregnant, are coming in and saying they're pregnant. So this has to do with what the mechanism is for Ozempic and Wegovy. Because they are a GLP-1 agonist, they sit in there and they make you think you're full. And when you're full, your stomach empties slower. And when your stomach empties slower, your birth control pill that you take leaves your stomach slower. So because of that shift, the continued efficacy of a daily birth control pill shifts in the way that it enters and stays in your body. Now, where this does not affect is IUDs, the patch, the shot, and barrier methods, condoms and diaphragms. Those are not affected because of the mechanism, but it looks like that's the mechanism that it's attacking. This may also affect Plan B. Like if you take Plan B to try and, the morning after emergency pill, and you're taking Plan B to make sure that cluster of cells doesn't implant, well, crap, that might not work either. Here's the other thing that happens with it. It looks like the side effect of nausea and diarrhea at some points during Ozempic and Wegovy may eject that from your body. So it's like missing a pill. If you're really ill, you may miss several pills, and that could cause you to become pregnant. The other mechanism is that sometimes weight can interfere with your cycle. It can interfere with your whole system and how it works. So if you're having difficulties getting pregnant and aren't on the pill and aren't doing anything, and then you lose a little bit of weight, you may shift into a more fertile arena and all of a sudden become pregnant when you didn't think you could. That's kind of nice that that's a side effect if you're trying to. But here's the complication. On their website, both Ozempic and Wegovy say you should not take this if you are pregnant, and you should stop taking it 2 months before trying to get pregnant. And they're saying the right thing. They're saying, hey, don't take this if you want to be pregnant. Don't take this if you're going to try to get pregnant. Like, don't have it in your system. It can be dangerous to that pregnancy because we don't know. There's some reporting from Jezebel that was really good, and it talks about this issue, and it talks about how there are some lab studies on mice that have shown issues with pregnancy and Ozempic. And this is where I want to kind of tie it back to thalidomide. We have an off-label use, and that off-label use seems to be beneficial to, in this case, people that want to lose weight, in that case, pregnant people, but it may have complications and we don't know. So my point with all of this is I want you to be more aware of what can happen and what can get complicated from this drug that's on the market, because I understand the compunction to want to lose 15 pounds. Remember, like that's a 30-pound swing for me. That's it. That's huge. It's a big deal. But when you do, be super aware of how that can affect you and may affect your birth control pill. It may affect your ability to get pregnant at all. And it is being prescribed at a higher rate per capita in Kentucky, West Virginia, Alaska, Mississippi, Louisiana, Tennessee, Alabama, Arkansas, Idaho, and North Dakota. Those have the highest incidence per capita of prescriptions, top 10. Now, what do you recognize about these 10 states as well? I'll give you a hint. 9 of them have laws restricting abortion access. What happens if Ozempic or Wegovy, and by the way, makers of Ozempic and Wegovy, I am not saying that this is the case. I'm being a cautionary tale. But what happens if this goes the way of thalidomide and we detect these abnormalities and possible stillbirths or malformations that may result in the death of the child prior to viability? Nothing in 9 of those states. You have the baby. Odds are, though, if you're able to afford Ozempic and Wegovy, which go for about $1,000 a pop per month, it's $1,000 per month, and there's 4 shots in that. So that means it's like $250 a week for this pill. You can probably afford to go to another state and have an abortion. But what about other drugs that you may need to take and are interfering with your pregnancy that you didn't know you were having? What about other people who are finding out that their baby may be stillborn, born without a brain, born without lungs in their body, but have to carry it to term? So take this example, this very personal example of Ozempic and Wegovy, which I understand the motivation to take. I'm not taking it, I don't plan on it, but I understand the people that do and the pressures that our society puts on people to look and act a certain way. But be aware, talk to your OBGYN, talk to your doctor before you really dive into this, and make sure that you have a path if something happens. And additionally, take this example and start to think about other complications inside of pregnancy that it may be necessary to terminate the pregnancy. Because in these 9 states, that's not happening. So I think thalidomide is a cautionary tale, and I think that Ozempic it could be dangerous, it could be fine. We don't really know. I will say that there's a measure that they use called quality adjusted life year. QALY. It's like a teddy bear. But a quality adjusted life year is this idea in medicine of, if we do this, what degree of quality of life are we adding and how many years are we adding of that? And the scale goes from 0 to 1, with 0 being dead. That's a bad year. And 1 being in great fitness and you're not inhibited by your physical fitness at all or your mental fitness. And then they go, okay, well, if you're at, a 0.5 or a 0.6 or a 0.7, are there things we can do to help? And then the question becomes, will this mess with it in some other way so that the added time it gives you is not worth the distress that it's going to cause? And you can use that in your evaluation of whether or not to take Ozempic or Wegovy. Is it worth the cost, possibly going into debt to take? Is it worth the cost to lose 15% of your body weight while you're on the drug? So remember, if you go off it, you're likely to swing back up. But if it's worth it for you and you're going to get the quality years out of it, I think that's great. But be aware of those complications. Be aware of the possibility that Ozempic or Wegovy might make you pregnant. It's not doing the fertilization. It's just changing your chemistry enough that you might get fertilized. So that's our show for today. I hope you take some time and think about this. Tell your friends about it so they know. Anybody that's thinking about taking Ozempic or Wegovy should evaluate those issues and decide if those issues are okay with them. This is editing, Justin. So I'm doing this insert and kind of stepping in here because there's something I didn't think about the entire time I was researching this episode until just now. Like after I finished filming it, I went upstairs, I started loading the footage, and I went, oh yeah! Remember Fen-Phen? It was this weight loss drug on the market in the late 90s, going into the early aughts. And it was, you took it and you lost weight. It was huge. Everybody was taking Fen-Phen. That was the same kind of thing where it was originally for something else and they went, hey, people lose weight. They lost weight because it was basically speed. Like you were just taking stuff to up your heart rate and get your body to process more of itself and get your daily resting or daily metabolic needs up because you were burning more calories because your heart was pumping faster. They took it off market and had a giant settlement because it was putting holes in people's hearts over the long term. It turned out to be more dangerous than fashionable. Yeah, you may be skinny, but it's like anorexia. Who wants that kind of skinny? That's problematic. So I wanted to jump in and mention that in the same way that you have thalidomide as an early kind of idea, we have a direct example of something that went sideways in Fen-Phen. A lot of people took it. A lot of people had holes in their hearts. There was a settlement. A lot of people got paid. So keep that in mind. On with the show. Apologies, actual Justin. And if it's worth it, I don't mind. You do what you want. But be aware that you might get caught in a space that you don't want to be in it and have to make a choice you don't want to make. With that, I'm signing off for Weekly Dad News. Love you guys. Bye.